Holy Hypocrisy. Geranda. How many anchorites live on the holy mountain? I do not know. Some say that there are 7. For some years now it has been very difficult for one to find a quiet place and live ascetically. That's why some fathers, when there were still some idiorythmic monasteries on the holy mountain, would find another way to live ascetically. For example, they would say, I'm not at peace at this monastery. I will go to some idiorythmic monastery to work and collect some money. And the fathers there would believe them. They would actually go to such a monastery and work for 3 or 4 months. And then they would ask for a huge raise in pay. When it was not given to them, they would say, it's not worth staying here, I am leaving. They would take some dry bread and leave, seeking some remote cave to hide and live ascetically. Others imagined that they had gone to work in yet another monastery, and when the fathers asked in that monastery about such and such monk, they would invariably answer, oh yes, he came by and was very peculiar. He wanted to collect money from us and then wanted a raise of pay. A monk asking for a raise. What kind of monk is he? As a result, these anchorites received a blessing from their ascetic labors and from the condemnation of others, and also from thieves. For thieves would hear that these anchorites had made money and would seek them out. After tormenting them to find their money, they would of course find none and would leave them alone. Geranda. How can I imitate a sister's virtue if she conceals it? She would be crazy if she didn't conceal it. The saints put more effort into concealing their virtue than in acquiring it. Do you know what the fools for Christ did? First, they would escape from the hypocrisy of the world and would enter the realm of evangelical truth. But this too was not enough for them, and they advanced to another level known as holy hypocrisy for the love of Christ. Having reached that, they were no longer perturbed. No matter what was done to them or what said to them, but in order to be able to reach this, a great deal of humility is necessary. While a lay person would be offended if something negative was said to him, or if he were not complimented for something he did, these anchorites actually rejoiced when others thought badly of them. In the old days, there were some fathers who pretended to be possessed by a demon, in order to conceal their virtue and to give others cause to change their high opinion of them. When I was in the monastery of Philoteu, which was idiorythmic at that time, there was a father who previously had been leading an ascetic life in Vegla. As soon as the fathers there had taken notice of his advanced ascetic life, he requested a blessing from his spiritual father to go away. In the parting, he said, I am tired of eating mouldy, dried bread here. I will go to some idiorythmic monastery where I can eat some meat as well, and live like a real human being. I would be crazy to stay here. He then went to the monastery of Philoteu and pretended to be possessed by demons. His former fellow monks heard that he was possessed and said, What a shame, the poor fellow became possessed. No wonder this happened to him, for he left us because he was tired of eating moldy dried bread, and went to an idiorythmic monastery to eat meat. What did he actually do? For more than 25 years he neither cooked nor slept. All night long he wandered through the corridors with a lantern to keep awake. When he became tired, he would lean against the wall, and if he began to fall asleep, he would again startle himself awake by saying in a whisper the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Then he would continue the prayer in his mind. Sometimes his voice shook with a violent outburst with a Jesus prayer, and was loud enough to be heard. And when he would meet a father, he would say, "Pray, pray, so the demon will leave me." So everyone considered him to be possessed by a demon. A young novice told me one day, "There goes the possessed," but I told him, "Don't call him that, he is a virtuous monk, but he pretends to be possessed." After that, the young novice had reverence for him. When he died, the fathers found him holding a piece of paper which contained the name of each monk, and next to it a derisive nickname for each of them, thus seeking even in death to prevent any good thoughts from anyone about him. Nevertheless, his relics gave off a wonderful fragrance. You see, he tried to hide himself, but the grace of God gave him away. For this reason, one must not draw conclusions about a person from his appearance, especially if one cannot discern what is actually hidden within.